Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a pretty wild analysis, one that imagines a secret U.S. military raid. But this isn't just any raid, it's a hypothetical mission to capture the sitting president of another country. Let's get right into it.
So the source really paints a picture here. Imagine this. It's January 3rd, 2026. Former President Donald Trump is in a dark room, glued to a screen. But this isn't some movie. He's watching a live feed of a real military operation unfolding thousands of miles away in Caracas, Venezuela. He's literally watching his own army carry out a raid.
Okay, so what is this mission? The source gives it a name, Operation Absolute Resolve. And the objective? Well, it's as simple as it is shocking. To capture a sitting head of state, Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro.
And the plan, as laid out in this analysis, is just surgical. First, a massive cyber attack takes out the power grid in Caracas, total blackout. Then, under the cover of that darkness, stealth helicopters fly in low. We're talking 100 feet above the sea to stay off the radar. Next, Delta Force Commandos hit President Maduro's residence. And get this, the whole thing, from the moment they go in to the moment they have him, is over in just 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Now, to really hammer home just how surreal this whole thing is depicted, the source points to this quote, which it attributes to Trump on Fox News. It was just like watching television. I watched literally like I was watching a television show. I mean, wow. It really blurs that line between a massive geopolitical event and, well, primetime entertainment. Okay, so while one leader is watching this unfold like a movie, the rest of the world wakes up completely stunned. And according to this analysis, everything that follows really boils down to two huge questions. Why on earth did this happen? And maybe more importantly, what does this mean for the rest of the world? This is where we shift from the what happened to the really big why.
All right, let's tackle that first big question, the why. How do you even begin to justify an action like this? Well, the source lays out two very different stories. You've got the official reason given to the public, and then you have the reason the source claims was the real motivation.
So, the official story is all about fighting a narco-terrorism conspiracy led by Maduro himself. The argument is that this was a necessary strike against a major drug kingpin. But the analysis we're looking at says, hold on a second. It claims the real prize here wasn't about justice at all. It was about one thing: oil. Black gold.
Let's dig into that official case for a minute. The source points out that Maduro and his wife were actually indicted in New York, and the charges are serious. Narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation. We're talking about an alleged scheme to smuggle hundreds of metric tons of cocaine. So, the picture they're painting isn't of a president, but of the head of a massive drug cartel.
But right away, the source starts to poke holes in this drug war motive. It pulls up some numbers. Yeah, 200 to 250 metric tons is a lot of cocaine. But then it points to a country like Guatemala, which in 2018 saw something like 1,400 metric tons pass through. So the question becomes, if this was really about stopping cocaine, why focus on Venezuela?
And the analysis doesn't stop there. It brings up an even bigger point. Right now, the leading cause of overdose deaths in the U.S. isn't cocaine, it's fentanyl. And where does most of that come from? Mexico. So again, the source asks, if the goal is truly to save American lives from drugs, wouldn't the focus be somewhere else?
And this is where the source presents its alternative motive. And it's a big one. You see, Venezuela has the single largest proven oil reserves in the world. Let that sink in. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran. We're talking 303 billion barrels. That is a number that absolutely changes the entire geopolitical game.
According to the analysis, this hypothetical raid isn't some random event. It's actually the climax of a long, tense story about oil between the U.S. and Venezuela. Things really heat up in 2001 when Hugo Chávez's government nationalizes the oil industry, basically kicking out many U.S. operations. After that, you see a failed coup attempt, which the source links to the U.S., followed by years and years of economic sanctions.
And for what it calls the smoking gun, the source points to this quote from Donald Trump about that nationalization. It was the greatest theft. They took oil away from us. The language there is just incredibly telling. It's not framed as a sovereign nation making a policy decision about its own resources. It's framed as theft, as if the oil was ours to begin with. Okay, so that's the why. But what about the consequences? The source dives deep into the fallout, looking at whether an operation like this could even be considered legal. Because, let's be real, something this big doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It sends shockwaves around the entire planet.
So the big question, was this operation legal? According to the analysis we're breaking down, the answer is a simple, clear, and emphatic no. Not even close, on multiple levels.
And here's why. The source points out two major violations. First, U.S. domestic law. The Constitution is pretty clear. Congress declares war, not the president acting alone. This operation completely bypassed that. Then there's international law. You've got the UN Charter, which basically says you can't just use military force against another country's territory. This raid would shatter that rule.
So, how would the administration defend this? Well, according to the source, the argument would be to try and create a kind of legal loophole. They'd claim it wasn't an act of war at all, but simply a law enforcement function. The idea is to frame a military invasion as nothing more than arresting an indicted criminal, just on a much, much bigger scale.
And you can probably guess how the rest of the world would react. The source describes immediate and almost universal condemnation. And it's not just from rivals like Russia and China. We're talking allies too. Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Spain, all lining up to say this is a massive violation. Even the UN Secretary General calls it out. It's a huge diplomatic nightmare. Okay, so we've covered the what, the why, and the immediate fallout. But what's the so what? Why does a hypothetical scenario like this even matter? Well, this is where the analysis really zooms out to look at the big picture, the long-term damage this could do to the entire world order.
The source gives this a really powerful label: New Age colonialism. And what it means by that is pretty chilling. It's the idea that we're returning to an era where powerful countries can just invade another sovereign nation to seize control of its natural resources. It's colonialism, just with 21st century weapons.
And that brings us to the final, haunting question that this entire analysis leaves us with. It really cuts to the core of everything. If the world's most powerful countries can just decide to make their own rules, if international law becomes optional, then what happens to everyone else? What does that mean for the rest of the world?